Let's go here. We go down to Florida, where a man named Corey Pujols has just been given some very good news. Despite punching an elderly man in the face and killing him, Corey will not be going to prison. He's getting house arrest and probation. House arrest and probation for Pujols for his victim, the morgue. So let's back up and give some context here. NBC reports, it says a Florida Dunkin Donuts employee was sentenced to 2 years on house arrest after he pleaded guilty to fatally punching a customer who used a racial slur. Corey Pujols, 27, was initially charged with aggravated manslaughter after he punched a 77-year-old man in the jaw following an altercation. In May, he pleaded not guilty, but agreed to change his plea for the lesser charge of felony battery. The incident began when the customer, identified by the Associated Press as Vanell Cook, became upset over the lack of service he was receiving. He was apparently in the drive-through line, and the service was pretty slow, as frankly it tends to be at Dunkin Donuts. And they should take some customer service classes from Chick-fil-A. Like Chick-fil-A, you could get in the Chick-fil-A line. This is not really the point at all, but I'll just say, Chick-fil-A, you get in the line, and there's 30 cars in front of you, and you get in that line, and then you could look over the parking lot, and there's Dunkin Donuts, and there's 3 cars in line, and the person who's 3 cars back will be in that line longer than you are, 30 cars back in the Chick-fil-A line. So, wasn't getting any service to the Dunkin Donuts. He was upset about that. He went inside, and then NBC continues, police said Cook and Pujols started arguing, and that Cook called the Dunkin Donuts employee, who was black, a racial slur. A criminal report affidavit states that the customer called him the N-word, and then he told Cook not to repeat it, and he did repeat it, and then Corey jumped over the counter and punched him in the jaw. Cook was knocked unconscious and fell, hitting his head on the floor, and had a skull fracture and contusions on the brain, and then he died 3 days later. Now, so this is an interesting case for me, because the victim, Vanell Cook, is, or was rather, by all indications, a total scumbag. And we do have to acknowledge that. Not only was he berating a minimum wage customer service worker and calling him racial slurs because he was upset about the service being too slow, but he was also, according to the reports I've read, a sex offender and a pedophile. It's probably telling that apparently nobody from Cook's family, he's 77 years old, nobody from his family showed up to the sentencing. Nobody showed up in the family and protested the fact that such a light sentence. Now, I'm personally not at all sad that a pedophile is dead. What's more, even leaving aside the pedophile bit, if you start screaming in another man's face and insulting him, and I don't care what words you use, you start screaming in another guy's face and insulting him, you deserve to get punched. That's my feeling. You deserve it. If you're in a physical state where a punch to the head might kill you, then watch your mouth is probably the best way to go. So I don't see someone as a victim. You start getting in someone's face and screaming at them, and they give you a chance to stop, and you don't, and they even warn you they're going to punch you in the face, and you keep going, and then you get punched, you're the victim. I don't really see it that way. You really brought that upon yourself. I also don't think that hitting someone is automatically worse than insulting them. I think we have this sort of this effeminate view that people have, this really feminine view that people have, that the worst possible thing you could ever do is physical violence is always the worst thing. No, I don't think that's worse than going up to in a guy's face and verbally spitting in his face, basically, or actually spitting in his face. So that's the way I feel. That's my personal view. And yet my personal views on these subjects aren't reflected by the law, nor necessarily, nor should they be. Perhaps, at least until I'm theocratic fascist dictator. Like, I personally think that if you get in a guy's face and start insulting him and you get punched, that's on you. You had that coming. But that's not what the law says. And probably I'll admit that the law can't really, that's not a precedent you can actually set, or you probably want to set. So, then you think that really what happened here is a guy was killed for saying a bad word. Do we want to set a precedent that allows that? I mean, Corey, the Dunkin Donuts employee, he didn't know that Cook was a pedophile, as far as I know. So that didn't factor into this. he also didn't hit him for screaming screaming at him and berating him generally. He hit him specifically for saying the N-word. And now he gets house arrest. So is the precedent that people who say this one magical word can be killed? The judge, in explaining the sentencing, specifically mentioned this. He mentioned a few things. He mentioned how, well, he didn't mean to, this was not an intentional homicide. He wasn't trying to kill him. He punched him one time. And that's true. That does factor into it. It's not premeditated murder, so that's going to factor into sentencing. But he also mentions the severity of the horrible word that was used. Like, that's because of that specific word. That's one of the reasons why he's not going to go to prison. Is that the precedent now? That if someone says this word to you, and you're a certain skin color, and they have a certain skin color, then you can kill them. That's certainly the feeling of people on social media who are celebrating this. To them, even leaving aside, pedophile, leaving all that aside, Cook deserved to die, not because he was a pedophile or anything else, but because he said that word. And the court seemed to have vindicated this position, which to me seems rather troubling. And you worry about the precedent there. Also, I think we could say this completely destroys the idea of any anti-black systemic racism in the court system. I mean, this was a black guy who killed a white guy for saying a word and isn't even getting no prison time for it. If our court systems are systemically racist in an anti-black way, then you would think it wouldn't work out that way. So, interesting case there, though. Well, I hope you enjoyed that clip from the Matt Walsh Show. If you did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right down there so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.